This is the Marketing Podcast Network.
Stories influence, teach, and inspire us. But what about the storytellers who create them? Uncorking a Story profiles storytellers to uncover how their background and life experiences influence the stories they create. We learn what motivates them, their path to success, and what fuels them to keep creating. It all starts by asking one simple question: where does your story begin? Welcome to Uncorking a Story. Now here's your host, Mike Carlin.
Hello and welcome to Uncorking a Story. I'm your host, Mike Carlin, and today I'm excited to introduce you to Charlotte Maya. Charlotte writes about suicide loss, resilience, and hope on her blog, SushiTuesdays.com. Widowed at 39, when her children were 6 and 8, Charlotte's writing explores the intersections of grief, parenting, and self-care, particularly within the context of suicide. Her work has been highlighted in Hippocampus Magazine and on The Mighty, and she's been featured on the A2A Alliance and Your Next Chapter podcast with Angela Raspass. She joins me today to talk about her memoir, Sushi Tuesdays, a memoir of loss, love, and family resilience. Welcome to Uncorking a Story, Charlotte.
Thanks, Mike. I'm really grateful to be here. Thank you.
I'm happy to have you here as well. And I'm curious. I ask every author the same question, and you're no different, which is, where does your story as an author begin?
I love this question so much because, of course, you can answer it in a lot of ways. Does it start with that first C- on my first freshman English paper in college in a class I thought would be my easy A? Does it begin by my senior year when I'd switched my major from engineering to English and took a poetry writing class that I absolutely adored? Does it start when I decided to go to law school because, poetry isn't really lucrative? Or does it start when I started law school, which is where I met Sam, my husband? Or does it start 17 years later, which is where the memoir begins, when I came home to discover a policeman and a priest in my driveway there to deliver the news of Sam's suicide? And since that's where the book begins, I think that's kind of where my author's journey begins. I always thought I would write a book. I never thought it would be about Sam's death.
Yeah. I'm curious. It's so much to unpack there. I want to go back to a few pivots maybe that you made. One is going from engineering to English, and then, potentially going to law school. Tell me about pivoting from engineering to English, because I can't think of two things that are, I don't say diametrically opposed, but are quite different from each other. What was going on?
Yeah, I started off as an engineering major. So I was taking, calculus, physics, chemistry, the big three, we called them. And I took this English class I didn't need to take because I had taken the advanced placement course and I AP'd out of it. And so I thought, this will be a great easy A to balance sort of the math. And I did fine in my physics and chemistry and calculus. And my first paper on my English, from my English class, had a C-. And I just kind of went, and then I worked really, really hard. And my next paper, I got a C. And I kept working hard. My next paper, I got a C+. And by the end of the semester, I got an A on my very last paper in this class. And I worked harder for that class than I did for my other classes, but I liked it more. And what's great about switching from engineering to English is that then I didn't have to take any more, general ed classes. I didn't have to take physics for poets because I had already taken physics for physicists. So I was done. Then I could take all the classes I wanted to take.
What do you think?
That's when I just pivoted there.
What do you think you had to either learn or unlearn when taking that English class to move from a C- to an A?
One of the things the professor told me, she said, Charlotte, you just have to read more. And I already read a lot. I think I had to learn to dive a little deeper. I think I had to learn just to go beyond the first draft, go beyond the second draft, go into the third draft. I am never one who likes to do things last minute. So I would finish my papers a week in advance, set them aside, and then come back to it. And I think learning that process and how to dive in, step back, dive back in was one of the things that was really helpful for me as a young writer.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's different, from, physics or any kind of math where there is likely a right or wrong answer, right? So, you either solve the problem, you've solved the equation, or you haven't. with writing, it of course is a bit more subjective. So after you put the pen down, maybe the temptation is to think that you're done. But what I've found, and what so many of my authors on the show tell me, is that, hey, that first draft is never it. You've got to keep going back to it. Better to get feedback on it before submitting it from some third party. And even though you may not appreciate the feedback at the time, it is typically helpful in sort of making you a stronger writer.
Yes, I think that's true. I think, just for the scientists who might be listening on the off chance that there's one, those equations often have multiple answers as well. I think too, I didn't really appreciate, probably not till I wrote this book, actually, the sort of group project nature that is writing, to get that feedback, because I'm in my own perspective, right? And it's a memoir, so it's certainly my perspective, and then trying to bring my reader along to see what I see and understand it in the way I see it, and then get that on the page. And so the feedback from writing coaches or early readers is really interesting, because they, of course, bring themselves to the page. And so then I get the opportunity to see whether or not I've brought them along the journey that I've taken.
Yeah. Well, let's talk a little bit about that journey and kind of where it begins, which is, you mentioned, coming home to a scene where that nobody wants to come home to. And, you mentioned sort of the police and a priest there. Never a good combo plate.
No.
Waiting for you at home. So just tell me a little bit about, whatever you can share about that. I'd love to hear it.
Yeah. Well, we had two kids. They're 6 and 8. And I had taken the kids out first to a soccer game and then to a hike. And Sam told me that he was going to stay home and take a nap, which made sense because he was tired and he'd had a long week. But what didn't make sense is when I was out at the hike, I didn't hear from him. And so it was just strange. And then when I got home with the kids in the car, I was expecting to see Sam's car in front of the house, and it wasn't there. And instead there was a police car. I pull into the driveway and there's a policewoman, a policeman, and a priest. And so they took me into the house, and the policewoman stayed with the kids in the car. And the policeman told me first that Sam had taken his own life. And then he told me that I would have to tell the police would tell the children that their father had died, but I would have to tell them how. And he said, and we recommend that you tell them the truth, because you do not want them to find out from somebody else. And at a time when nothing made sense, that totally made sense. So that honesty and transparency really guided my journey as a young widow and as the single parent of 2 young children. It's the hardest thing I've ever done, to tell my 6 and 8-year-old children that their father had taken his own life. And also, my kids know that they can trust me for honest answers to life's hardest questions. They're 22 and 24 now, so we've had a lot of conversations since then. We start off with little words: dead, daddy, sad, died. We said died. I didn't say passed on. I didn't say we lost him. That's confusing. Where did you lose him? Doesn't make any sense to a child. So we were very transparent. And, we cannot solve the problem of suicide with silence. So that honesty and transparency has really guided my journey, both as a human and as a writer.
Yeah. I mean, on the show, I've had the, I don't know if it's honor, but of, the chance to interview people who were suicidal and wrote memoirs about sort of that time and how they kind of overcame it. But how did you first deal with, Sam's death? And it just, I'm sure you had a number of questions like, how did I not see this coming? Or, I mean, how did you process it?
That's a great question. And yes, I had all those questions. I was terrified that I would be ostracized because of how Sam died, because there is a lot of stigma and shame around suicide, both for people who are suffering and for those of us who've lost someone to suicide. And I think that one of the risks is that stigma and shame reduces the person's life to the last act of their life. And that's not fair. And it's not true. They're so much bigger than that last moment. But I was afraid to say it out loud. But what I found was exactly the opposite. So the first day, for example, that I brought the kids to school, Sam died on a Saturday, and I took the kids to school on Monday because it made sense to me that they needed structure and consistency. And so we walked up the blocks to school, and I took them to their classrooms, and I squatted down. I looked in their little eyes and I said, okay, whenever you're ready to come home, let your teacher know and I will come get you. And I didn't know whether they'd last 5 minutes or 10 minutes or half an hour to lunch, but they had lasted the whole day. And when I turned around, when I had walked the kids to school, what I found was like people were averting their eyes and kind of moving away from us. And I thought, okay, here's where it begins. And after I had dropped the kids off at their classrooms and started walking back home, what I found was the opposite, is people were drawn toward me. And I heard just so much comfort and encouragement. And I live in a pretty small town in Southern California, and I had gone to high school here. And people had seen the police car in front of my house. I couldn't have hidden Sam's suicide if I had tried. And people were just drawn to me. And the more I would talk about what that process is like, what did I miss? How did I miss it? People wanted to have that conversation. And so instead of finding that people were driven away, what I found is that people actually wanted to know. People really care. People don't want people to suffer in silence. It doesn't help. Yeah. So when we draw to each other and have those conversations, that's where the healing began. And they kept telling me, Charlotte, you have to write the book. You have to write the book. So I did. It took me 10 years, but I did.
Yeah. Well, tell me about just the origin of the name Sushi Tuesdays. It is a pretty it's interesting. Tell me a little bit more about it.
Yeah, you don't have to like Sushi Tuesdays. Some people might be grateful to know. Sushi Tuesdays started as my day for self-care, actually. I had a yoga class that I really liked that was on Tuesday mornings, and then my therapist had a recurring time slot that opened up on Tuesdays. So Tuesdays became my day for Charlotte. So I'd take the kids to school in the morning, and then I went to yoga, and then I went to therapy. And sometimes I would take myself out to sushi because, like I said, they were little, so they didn't really care about sushi. But I didn't make appointments to meet with lawyers or CPAs or anybody else. I didn't even make dates for coffee with friends. It was truly just sort of my cocoon time. And as a practical matter, it wasn't the whole day. It was just from 9 to 2 or whatever time the kids were in school. But, when you're a single parent, that time is significant. And it was really my day to figure out, what does Charlotte need? Do I need to go for a walk? Do I want to crawl back into bed and cry? All good options, all allowed. Do I want to go to sushi? Do I need to eat it all? I probably did, because I sort of lost my appetite. But what do I want? What would feed me? Do I need to just sit? Can I just sit in the sunshine, or can I just sit and listen to the rainfall? What do I need for my own healing? So Sushi Tuesdays was really my day about self-care.
Okay. And that leads to a blog. And I'm curious, what role did writing play in your healing process?
This is such a great question. I started the blog several years after Sam's death, and I feel like the writing was somewhat therapeutic, but mostly what was therapeutic was therapy. I had therapy for that. And the writing was more kind of learning the craft. So blog post, as you know, is about 1,000 words, and a full-length memoir is about 100,000 words. So I started with the blog because a book was too overwhelming. And after writing a bunch of blog posts, I kept the blog going for several years and printed out all the posts. I had a stack. It looked like it was a book, but then when I read through it, it didn't have a beginning, middle, and end. It didn't tell a coherent, cohesive story. So I had to kind of step back and go, okay, how am I going to get there from here? And that's when I hired a book coach and handed her the stack, let her help guide me. And So we worked together after 6 months. We worked together for 6 months and created an outline. It was 100 pages, single spaced. It was a really robust outline.
Yeah.
And I kind of thought after that the book would write itself, which it did not. So, so I wrote a first draft and a second draft and a third draft. And by the fifth draft, I was ready for it to go to a larger audience.
You think that starting with, all these blog posts and these, I'm sure tens of thousands of words that you've written, it might be easy to kind of put that all together and make a novel. And I had a priest on this show who thought the same thing. He runs a Catholic radio show on Sirius, and he said, I had all of these, he called it mass class. All of these questions and answers that I did on the radio. And I figured I could just take all the transcripts of those and kind of put together this book. And he's like, I'll never do it again. Because it was it was a lot more work than he was anticipating. Tell me about this book, Coach, how you found them, and the role they played in helping you shape this memoir.
Well, she taught a workshop. So I thought, okay, I'll take a workshop and that'll get me there. And I loved her workshop, but I was still writing these smaller pieces. And, but I really liked the way she thought about things. She was really curious. She was really very naturally curious. And so she would ask very intimate questions, and that would force me to kind of think about, what is the story underneath the story? What's really happening here? And then what she really did for me that I didn't understand was structure, how to structure a full-length story. So with a beginning, a middle, an end, an inciting incident, a turning point. How do you get there? And this is, I think, a particular challenge with memoir because it's my own life. So everything seems important. Everybody is precious to me. And story only moves forward with conflict, right? So you have to kind of dive into where is the conflict, and think about who needs to be in the story, who needs to be a full-fleshed character in the story, so that I can move the story forward. And what really is the story I'm trying to tell? Like, I've got this whole life. How am I going to carve it like a piece of marble and carve, chip away the pieces that don't belong until I have a story, until I have like the statue that is the story. What is the story I'm trying to tell here?
And I think so many authors and writers grapple with that, whether it's memoir, whether it's, nonfiction, whether it's fiction. We send in our 100,000 pages, or 100,000 words rather, not pages. That would be very scary.
That's daunting.
And then we need an editor to chop out 30,000 of them, to get it to, where mass market books typically are. But we do think everything's important. Then we have to realize that, editing is making hard choices, and
totally,
usually, less is more. And, taking the advice of those editors, agents, whoever, beta readers, they do make our writing better. Yes. But it takes a while to realize that, because there is that ego, especially with younger or newer authors, where they say, "Oh my gosh, all of these words are important. How dare you cut this?" And then you realize, well, needed to go. Kind of needed to go. So, what's the reaction been to the book?
I've gotten a lot of really positive feedback so far, and I'm very excited about, it's always gratifying to hear somebody say, Charlotte, you get the email, Charlotte, it's midnight and I've been reading your book for 3 hours and I cannot put it down, except for that I have to put it down because I have to get up early for an appointment tomorrow. Or, somebody else who says, I sat down this morning to flip through your book and now it's 4:00. I haven't eaten. I finished it. It's beautiful. I laughed. I cried. And I can't wait to see you and talk about it more. So that kind of response is really kind of thrilling.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I mean, just talking about this topic, probably nothing anybody wants to talk about, but how important is it to talk about it? Because we can't pretend it doesn't exist. And there has to be a resource, for people whose lives have been impacted by suicide or could be impacted by suicide.
Well, suicide is the 10th leading cause of death in this country, and we don't talk about it. It's the second leading cause of death for the age demographic 25 to 34, which is absolutely horrifying. And so we have to talk about it. The one thing we know helps in this area is talking about it. And so I'm just really grateful that people are willing to have this conversation. And I get a lot of hope from the new National Lifeline 988, that new national lifeline that's 24/7 everywhere. So that just having the lifeline there reminds people that it is normal to struggle. Mental health is health. And that there are people who care, there are resources, and you don't have to struggle alone.
Yeah. And if I'm remembering some statistics appropriately, there's a significant difference between men and women in that age group you mentioned, where men are more likely to, die by suicide than women.
There is yes, in general, 3 times as many women attempt suicide, but 3 times as many men die from it. But the CDC just came out with a new report for teenagers, and the statistics for teenage girls are absolutely devastating.
Oh, wow.
So yes, this is something that we have to do better, and we can do better. I really believe that we can, and that we will. But it's important to have these conversations in the same way that we're fluent in matters of physical health. We can become fluent in matters of mental health, and how we talk about it matters. People used to use the phrase committed suicide, and you will still hear that. That's kind of what we're used to hearing. But the reason we don't like the word committed is it has criminal connotations, right? You commit a crime, but suicide is not a crime. It's an illness. And when we understand that it's an illness and we can frame our language accordingly, then we can have these conversations that are less judgmental and more healing. And so I know it sometimes seems weird to say suicided, for example, as a verb, but we can get used to that. We change our language all the time. And so how we talk about suicide makes a difference. But personally, I'd rather have a glitchy conversation about suicide than no conversation at all.
Yeah.
So I would encourage people, even if they are afraid of making a mistake or using the wrong language, there's really no wrong way to have the conversation. And if somebody is truly suffering and they are thinking about it, you're not going to remind them that they're thinking about suicide by bringing it up. On the contrary, if you mention the word suicide, or are you thinking of harming yourself, or where are you in this process, just asking the question opens up the space for an answer, and that can save a life.
Yeah. And sometimes all that's required is a phone call.
Yes.
Or a conversation.
But also suicide is an illness, and it's important to, it's so thorny and complicated. It was so much easier for me to forgive Sam than it was for me to forgive myself.
Why did you feel like you needed to forgive yourself?
Because I was his wife. I should have known exactly how much he was suffering. Wouldn't I be the logical person he would have turned to if he had asked anyone at all for help? Shouldn't it have been me? So the guilt when you survive a suicide is terrible, right? What if I'd made that phone call? What did I say? What could I have said different? What did I miss? What did I think was normal stress? What did I think was normal back pain? And so that sort of that the suicide autopsy never ends. There are still times when I'll see something in one of our kids and go, I wonder if I should have asked Sam about that. And the healing is ongoing. There's never a date certain on which you're done. You can check that off, or an expiration date for grief, right? The healing continues. We always joke in our house, we don't hide the skeletons in the closets. We put them right out on the walls and the mantelpiece, because if you love somebody, that love remembers, and that's a good thing. It's not bad. And so Sam is still a very vibrant part of our conversations. And when I think about Sam and the mistake that he made. What I mean by the mistake that he made is that he didn't ask for help. That's the mistake he made. Shortly, a year after Sam died, another cousin died from cancer, and she'd been fighting cancer for a couple of years. She was 33. And at the funeral, one of the other cousins said, Carol was fighting for her life, and Sam threw his away. And it made me really mad because Sam was fighting just as hard. Carol had chemo, she had doctors, she had therapists, she had people showing up with casseroles, and she had people offering to drive carpool and watch the baby. And Sam was fighting alone. Don't fight alone. We don't have to fight alone. And so that is, but it's hard because suicide is a very complicated, thorny grief to untangle.
Yeah. Have your kids read the book?
Yes. Well, one of them has read it beginning to end. One of them has read most of it. Anything that the kids were in was probably in a blog post that I had already run by them. It is very hard for them to read. And also, the one who's read most of the book, but not all of it, said, Mom, you did a really good job of making sure this was from your perspective. And I really appreciated that because he was 6 when his father died. And so I remember some of the things he said, but his experience of grief is different than mine.
Yeah. And they're not only reading, of course, about their father, they're reading about you.
Yes.
And kind of getting to know you in a way that maybe some children don't really get to know their parents that intimately.
And maybe don't want to.
Right.
Because we don't always like to think of our parents as the full range of their human experience. Yeah.
That's interesting. My parents are 90 and 89. And I'm seeing them in a much different way than I saw them when I was growing up. Because when I was growing up, they were these hardworking, had all the answers, never needed help. And now I see them in their later years and, the mental, they're slowing down. My mother can't remember anything. Still very happy person, but, she can't remember a thing. And my father's now the primary caretaker in a role that he never had. So I'm actually, and now that I have my own children who are adults, I think, much more empathy now for my parents than I could have before. Yes. But now I'm kind of seeing them in a completely different light, and not necessarily one that I needed to or wanted to, but it's a circle of life thing, I guess.
Well, I think it's hard too when you see your parents struggle and suffer, and especially if they had always been robust and strong your whole life, it's part of the loss of who they were. And then the pressure to step up and then be the caretaker, maybe yourself. It's the sandwich situation is real.
That's right. I feel like I just got rid of my kids.
I know.
I don't want to say got rid of them, right? But, they're for the most part out of the house. They're all, in college, and they come back in the summers. But now it's like, whoa, now I've got to change diapers for older people now.
So I feel like this. So, as you know, if you've read the book, I did accidentally fall in love with the most eligible widower in town, and we got married. And so we have 4 kids, and now the youngest of our collective 4 is about to graduate from college, knock on wood. And I feel like I'm launching this book, and now Charlotte has finally figured out what she wants to do with her grown-up life. So I feel that like, okay, I launched the children, and now I get to grow up too. Yeah.
I have to ask about what's over your left shoulder. No, your right shoulder. I get my right and left mixed up. Tell me about that painting. It looks like a painting.
Rain and Shine. It is a painting, Rain and Shine. When Tim and I got married, the first song, our first dance was Come Rain or Come Shine. And because we had both been widowed, we knew what for better and for worse looks like in sickness and in health. Tim's first wife, Debbie, had died from colon cancer when she was 41. So, our top 10 list of bad days around here is pretty harrowing. And so but if you can love through rain and shine, that's everything.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Well, I want to ask you some light questions.
Yes, great.
So, and one of the ways in which I get to know my guests a bit more is through pop culture. So I'm curious, Charlotte, when you were growing up, what were some of your favorite things to watch on TV?
Okay, I am one of the worst television watchers you will probably ever interview. In high school, I remember sometimes sneaking home and trying to get home early enough so that I could watch an episode, a rerun of Charlie's Angels before my parents came home and I had to start home. Yes, exactly. I think I watched a little Cheers. I wasn't a big television watcher. I'll tell you, my father read the entire Lord of the Rings trilogy to my sister and me. And I think we were in junior high when he started. And I think I was a junior or senior in high school by the time we got to the end of that trilogy. So that kind of lets you know where my nose was usually in a book.
Well, tell me, well, if not for not TV, tell me what were your favorite authors, favorite types of book to read when you were growing up?
Well, of course, I loved Charlotte's Web. Nancy Drew. I read a lot of Nancy Drew when I was little. Where the Red Fern Grows was one of Wilson Rawls, one of my favorites. Those are some of my favorites as a young child. Yeah.
Fair enough. What about music when you were growing up? Were you did you enjoy music?
I took a lot of piano lessons. And so it was kind of a treat when I got to listen to pop music. I loved Billy Joel, David Bowie, Depeche Mode in high school. I listened to a lot of Depeche Mode. Pink Floyd.
Oh, David Gilmour. One of my favorite guitar players, hands down. Such a great tone.
Yeah.
I got to see Billy Joel this past summer at Madison Square Garden. And I think I cried 3 or 4 times during that show. You know, it was such a powerful show. I mean, I've loved his music forever, but hearing it live and then just the way some of those songs hit me as an adult, like My Life, which was the theme song to Bosom Buddies. I know you were not a big TV person, but there used to be a show called Bosom Buddies with Tom Hanks. Peter Scolari. And that was the first time I ever heard that song. Moving Out was in the theme song to that show. But I heard that song and I'm not Moving Out, My Life. And because Moving Out was one of the other songs I started bawling during. And I'm realizing at the show, I'm like, maybe my emotions are not regulating well today. I don't know. But
well, it's hard to let the children go. And I know yours are triplets. So having a very full nest to a very empty nest at once it sounds pretty dramatic to me. I had 4 children over the course of, so, you know, it takes a lot longer to sort of empty the nest. You can titrate it in a different way, but it's very emotional. It's very emotional every time a child leaves. And so I can only imagine for your very full nest to a very quiet one would be very teary.
Yeah, it's tough. I would find myself being like, hey, does anyone need me to bring them anything up at school? I mean, I got some time. Did anyone forget a jacket? Did you guys pack a lunch today? Can I bring you lunch?
Yeah, all those forgotten calculators, and you're like, dang it, I don't have time to run to the school today. Now you kind of
like, no, Dad, it's fine. Although,
the cat's in the cradle is real.
Yeah, absolutely. In terms of publishing, what were some lessons you felt like you may have learned the hard way going through the publishing process?
That's an interesting question. I think I was really naive about what it takes to get a book from Word document into bookshelves. And I don't think that's bad because I think you have to do all the steps in order. And so when I finally had a manuscript that I was really excited about and ready to share with the world, then I learned I had to get an agent. I was like, oh, well, that sounds, how do you do that?
That's right.
So I did that. And then, she started pitching publishers and like, okay, well, how do we do that? I just feel like, I guess I just kind of learned along the way. And in some ways, everything was sort of a surprise. I guess I don't know. I like learning. So maybe that just worked in my favor, that I would get to the next place and go, okay, now what I need, now I need a publicist. How exciting is that? So,
and I know you found a good one.
And then here we are. I did.
I know because they found me, but no, I actually know your publicist pretty well, and she's fantastic.
Yeah, she's fantastic.
But finding the agent, I'm curious. How did you find your agent? How long did it take?
So the book coach that I mentioned, one of the things that she does, her workshops are 10 weeks long. And during one of the weeks, she always has an author visit. And I always liked going to the author visits because I always learned something. And she invites alumni from the workshop to go to that author visit. And then after COVID, she started doing the author visits online, which was fantastic because then it was a lot easier for me to Zoom in for an hour to meet the author. And I felt like I always learned something from the author. So one of the weeks or one of the workshops, this agent came on to talk about the publishing process. Oh, this is perfect because I have a manuscript and now I have to find an agent. And she talked about the different options for publishing. And she was very generous with her information and her time. And at the end of the Zoom, she gave us her email. And so I emailed her because I had some questions about some of the different publishing options. And she said, your book sounds so interesting. She said, I don't have time right now to agent anything, but I am curious and I'd like to read it. So would you mind sending it to me? I said, sure, no problem. And in the meantime, she had given me some other resources and I had started pitching other agents. And so I sent her the manuscript and I didn't hear back from her for a couple of weeks. So I thought, okay, well, she doesn't really have anything good to say. So she's not saying anything at all. And then I got an email from her on a Sunday saying, would you have time to talk Monday or Wednesday? So of course I said, yes, Monday. And I sort of prepared myself for the feedback she was going to give me. It's beautiful, but it's too long. You need to cut out 50 pages, or it's beautiful, but you need to finish it earlier, or you need to start it faster, or whatever it was going to be. And I just really put myself in the mindset that whatever information she's willing to give me is a win, because it's more information than I would have had without whatever she has to say. So I pick up the phone, we start chatting, and she's going on and on about how beautiful this book is. And about 15, 20 minutes into the conversation, I said, can I ask a really stupid question? And she said, yes. I said, are you offering to represent me? And she said, oh, yes. So in some ways, it's sort of the dream scenario, because I got I found an agent who just really loved this manuscript. And she had very few little polishing changes and was ready to go. Yeah. So she just really got it. She got the story. She got that, how important it is to talk about suicide, how we can talk about suicide in a way that is gentle and humanizing and true and honest. It's and here we are.
And here we are. And you have so much to thank that book coach for as well.
Yes,
because it sounds like she really helped you get this from idea to manuscript to story. And then, of course, the link, pretty much direct link to that agent. But yeah. It is fantastic. Anything you would tell your younger self? Let's say you could go back in time, and maybe it's, the younger Charlotte who's getting those C- on those papers. Anything you would whisper into her ear, from your sort of, who Charlotte is now, what would you tell the younger Charlotte, if you can give her some words of advice?
I think I might tell her something that I tell my own kids a lot, which is that the universe is already saying yes. You just have to ask. You might have to keep asking, and asking can be the hardest part, but just keep asking. The universe is already saying yes.
All right, just keep asking. Charlotte, if people want to reach out to you, do you have a website or social media that we can point them to?
I do. Charlotte Maya, it's charlotte-maya.com. And I'm on Instagram as Charlotte Maya Writer. And there's an email on my website. The website has all the links. So that's usually the easiest way to go.
All right, we'll be sure to put the website and all of those other links in our show notes. Charlotte, thank you so much for stopping by Uncorking a Story and letting me uncork yours.
Mike, thanks so much for including me. Appreciate it.
Thanks for listening to Uncorking a Story. If you'd like more information about today's guest or to find out more about Mike, go to uncorkingastory.com. If you enjoyed the show, please subscribe, rate, and review us at Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Tune in every week to hear Mike Carlin uncork a new story.